Hello, welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is two women, both identify as gay, and they're married to each other, and they're attending LDS Church, and they've started an Instagram account that we'll talk about. It's called The Fourth Option. But welcome to the podcast, Ryan and Liz.
Hi, we're so glad to be here.
Ryan and Liz, I'll introduce each of them individually and just give a little bit of overview of their story. And then we'll get them talking about their story, how they came to terms with their sexual orientation, how they found each other, why they decided to get married, and why they continue to attend church, and what people are doing to support them, and how we can better support couples that want to attend church in a same-sex marriage. I'll start with Ryan. How do I say your last name? Is it Giles?
Yes.
And yep. Ryan and Liz, since they're married, they've both taken the name Giles. So Ryan Giles, she grew up in South Jordan, went to Bingham High School, currently is an EMT, and served a mission. Tell our listeners where you served. It's off the coast of Australia.
It is. The mission was the Vanuatu Port Vila mission, and I served in the country of New Caledonia.
And what language did you speak, Ryan?
I actually spoke French. It's a French territory.
You spoke French. And were there a lot of sisters in the mission?
Quite a few in the country that I was in, especially. It was a pretty solid half and half between elders and sisters.
And we visited before we went live because I'm a hurricane junkie, and I'm aware that Category 5, a super typhoon or whatever they're called in the Southern Hemisphere, hit part of your mission. But didn't hit you, but you were on communication blackout and your family didn't know if you were okay or not, and you were okay. So anyway, thanks for your service in that part of the world. I'd love to go there someday. And you're an EMT right now, but you're working towards something else. Tell our listeners professionally what you're working towards.
Yeah, I just got into a program to get a master's in occupational therapy. So I'm going to go through that program and become an occupational therapist to, help. I'd love to do pediatrics, so hopefully help kind of like kids either rehabilitate from injury or help kind of raise their like fine motor and gross motor skills.
That is great. Ryan is 28, and now I'll introduce her wife, Liz. Liz Giles grew up in Yakima, Washington, where this couple now makes their home, served a mission in the Scottsdale, Arizona mission. I'm not aware of any hurricanes that have hit the Scottsdale mission, but you get monsoons that intrigue me.
A lot of monsoons.
And you're a little younger than your wife. You're 25. Tell our listeners what you do. You're a teacher, but you also work with outdoor programs.
Yeah, so I got my degree in secondary English ed and taught high school English for 2 years. And then we had the opportunity to move back here to Yakima from Houston, so I could help build an outdoor education program through the summer camp that I grew up working at and attending, which is also where we got married.
That's great. And we visited before we went live about Houston, and it turns out you live very close to where my wife grew up, the Spring Branch area, which is just a little west of downtown Houston. My wife's family doesn't live there anymore, lives more in the Copperfield area, but I love that area, Memorial City, Spring Branch. I love Houston, and I'm glad you had a couple of years to live there. They're going to talk about their story of figuring out their sexual orientation. They both identify as gay, meeting each other at BYU, being married in 2021. Listeners, you may wonder why I'm an active Latter-day Saint. This podcast supported the church. Why I would like to have somebody in a same-sex marriage on the podcast. And a couple of reasons. One is I want to provide a platform for all stories in this space, as long as they're respective of the church. And one of the principles of this podcast is LGBTQ people have to write their own story. And I think it's good for them at a range of stories as they figure out their best path forward. I'll always invite people to follow church teachings, but at the end of the day, I'll say you've got to receive personal revelation on what your path is, and I'll walk with you, and I'll leave it all at Christ's feet. I also respect these two women for wanting to stay engaged in the church. And there's a couple dozen couples I'm aware of that are in same-sex marriages and continue to attend church. And why would they do that? Well, they can tell their story on the podcast, but a lot just have a testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and it's their spiritual home. And the couples that I'm aware of aren't asking to have temple recommends. They know they're living outside of church teachings, but they hope they're welcome. And as Elder Uchtdorf has taught, there should be no belief or behavior, no sign at the door that says your testimony needs to be this high to enter, which to me is teaching a principle that the gate is wide at the congregation level and everybody should feel welcome. And we shouldn't be sifting at the congregation level. And so I think most of their experiences have been positive. And I look at that as a maturing of our church to welcome everybody and not create a feeling of judgment or sifting at the congregation level. So that's the end of my introduction. They're also going to talk about the Instagram account they've created, which we'll link to in the show notes. It's called The Fourth Option with some the.fourth.option. We'll put that in the show notes so you can check out their account. They're sharing their story there. It's just a beautiful story. A wonderful love story of these two women finding each other. And I'm glad you have each other and share your lives with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan or Liz or whoever wants to take the lead.
Yeah. So as you were mentioning, the order of realizing your sexuality and then finding each other and stuff, it's kind of funny because our entire story is kind of flipped. We fell in love before we realized we were gay, and we in some ways got engaged before we really started dating. Not really, but kind of. And just everything is kind of a little bit flipped. So we're excited to tell you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, this is Ryan speaking. For me, I didn't necessarily have any concept of the idea that I might be gay up until I fell in love with Liz. I wasn't really all that interested in boys. I didn't really have strong crushes on anyone really growing up, and that was a little odd, but I figured eventually, that would happen and I would meet someone who was, I don't know, interesting enough or exciting enough or whatever it was that had not been enough up to that point, and things would fall into place. And it turns out that was true. It just wasn't in the way I was expecting. So I grew up in the church. On my mom's side, they're all like pioneers back to the founding of the church. And then on my dad's side, my grandparents converted when he was about 6. And so grew up in the church, served a mission, and I came back and was kind of just expecting everything to go in the usual pattern of things. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah. And on my side, I also grew up in the church, but 3 of my 4 grandparents are converts. So we didn't have as much of the history there. And when I look back, there are so many clues and so many signs that I was gay from a really young age. But that was not an option. And I just assumed that's how everyone felt about their friends, their close friends, and turns out it's not. But throughout the later part of high school, I did go on a lot of dates with boys, and it's really funny looking back at my journal entries because I'd be talking about this guy that liked me, and I'd be like, yeah, he has a nice personality, or he's ambitious. But there was never there's never anything really there. And so I guess when I ended up falling in love with Ryan, I was surprised, but I also internally, once I got past like the layers and layers of denial, I wasn't that surprised.
Yeah, so we met when I moved in next door to her. We were both students at BYU, and one of my friends from high school was her roommate, and so I moved in next door to them so that I would know somebody when, because I had just gotten off of my mission and didn't know a whole lot of people that were at school at that time. So, and then that's how we met, is when I was hanging out with my friend from high school. She would come and hang out with us as well. And embarrassingly, I'm an introvert. I don't make friends very easily. And so in my experience, if my roommates had friends over, I might, say hi as I pass through, and then I would intentionally avoid being around new people. And so I did not make an effort to get to know her name because I didn't anticipate her being around all that much. And
all of 3 letters.
So, so it took me a while to even remember her name, but we got to be pretty good friends. And then at the end of that school year, her and my friend from high school and a couple of our other friends, we all became roommates in another apartment. Mm-hmm. And so then we became even closer friends. There was a really good group of people. We, spent a lot of time together and had game nights and made, weekly roommate dinners together, and
night hiked the Y, did all sorts of game nights, went to the temple together pretty often. Just lots of bonding time as a group of the 6 of us women. And one of the things that we did a lot as an apartment group was we played improv games. And one of the ones that we played, we would write down different lines on pieces of paper, and then partway through acting something out, they'd say stop, and then you'd have to draw a line and say whatever it said, and then
like a whose line is it anyway kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. And over the course of that school year, Ryan and I just kept ending up in situations where we were acting as a couple, either because of the line or the situations. We would have to propose to each other or be parents trying to figure out what to do with a crazy teenage child, or anything in between.
Yeah. And so as a joke, we started calling each other babe, just in reference to all of the situations that we were put in during those improv games. And then over time, we kind of started to realize that it maybe wasn't as fake, our little relationship, our bit wasn't as fake as we wanted to pretend it was. So, but yeah, we at that point had gotten to know each other really well. We'd spend a lot of time, like with each other just in social situations and just like having one-on-one conversations. And so then it was around the end of that school year that we unexpectedly, for both of us, just like realized that that this wasn't really a friend relationship anymore, that we were very much in love with each other. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. Although even then, even after we had acknowledged those feelings and said, I love you and all of that, I was still convinced, or trying to convince myself, I guess, that I was straight and this was just a fluke that sometimes just happens to roommates. So at that point, and it still took me another year after that before I acknowledged even to myself that I was gay. It took you a little bit less time.
A little bit less, yeah. But I had less going on in terms of I didn't have these years of denial, where it was more just I fell in love. I realized, well, this is, I'm in love with Liz. So what does that mean? And then I had a little bit of denial because it's scary. It really changes. It changes a little bit of everything.
Well, it changes potentially an entire eternal trajectory, at least according to our current theology. And that's a lot to face down.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you don't really fall in love with a girl unless you're kind of wired to fall in love with a girl, I think. And so it was at that point, I kind of just accepted that. But it took me another year to feel comfortable enough to admit it to anyone other than myself. Because I had a lot of questions about what, how does that work with my faith, and what does my future look like if I'm gay, and what do I want to do with that? What path do I want to take? And I didn't have answers for any of it. And so it took me about a year of wrestling with those questions before I was able to come out to anyone else.
Yeah. And on my side of things, rewinding back to when we fell in love, so a year back, at this point, I was in the process of completing my mission paperwork. I was like you said, a few years younger than Ryan, so I was 19 at this time. And this definitely upended my plans a little bit, because I was suddenly in love with a woman and knew how I felt, but also had received so many strong promptings that I should serve a mission, and that's where the Lord needed me to be for that next year and a half. And so it took some soul searching, trying to decide if I was going to move forward with that. But I decided that I was ready to commit 110% to serving the Lord. And so I talked with my bishop and my stake president in Provo. And then after doing a study abroad, after that semester ended, I also communicated with my bishop and stake president here in Yakima. And after some time of processing and working through that, I was able to submit my mission papers and then get my call later that summer. But when I headed off on my mission, I was still in the denial that I was actually gay or same-sex attracted, and just thought that was a fluke. That was very much real, but it was, I'm still straight, just high key in love with someone. But yeah, so I headed off on my mission, and it wasn't until about halfway through my mission that I finally came to a head with my sexuality, and realized that wasn't something that was just going away, that I had been consistently attracted to different women throughout my life and still was. So that was like a really lonely and really scary time in my mission, because I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone because I was still really committed to serving. And so I was scared to tell anyone, because I didn't want them to be like, oh, well, you should go home then, even though I was worthy and I still desired to serve. And I don't think that would have happened, but that's where I was at that point. So I didn't tell anyone for quite a while. But that definitely sent me into a really dark place of reading all these things across the history of the church and gospel library about queer people, reading the talks of Kimball and Clark and others that, said some really hurtful things about our community that were definitely outdated and not the current stance of the church in terms of homosexuals being deviants and of the devil, and it being a disease and things like that. But it's still, a lot of that is still there in the Gospel Library app. So yeah, that was a rougher time for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so while she was still on her mission, excuse me, I'm so sorry. While she was still on her mission, and while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, the way that I saw it and the way a lot of people that I talk to kind of see things, there are really only three options for LGBTQ people in the church, and that is, you can try to remain single and celibate, and in that way you're able to fully participate in the church. And then the second option is you can pursue a mixed orientation marriage, and date people who you might not be fully attracted to, but who you might love in other ways, like it's kind of more as like a deep emotional connection or a friendship. And then the third option would be to date someone that you are attracted to, but the way that I understood it is that if you were to do that, you pretty much had to leave the church. Like there's no way for you to stay and still be able to date someone that you're attracted to. And so I really wrestled with a lot of those, and I would kind of choose one and say, I think this is the right path. I think this is what I feel like I need to do. And I really intended to do it and to stick with it. And I would pray about it, and I would work on it, and I would talk, about the concept of it with people, in usually in an abstract, because I wasn't out at that point. But and I just felt sick to my stomach, right? And so I would eventually, after a few months, I'd say, well, that must not be right, because I just cannot feel settled about this, And so then I would decide on another one, and I'd start, pursuing it essentially in whatever way that meant, and just would feel sick to my stomach about it. And so I'd switch to the third one and feel terrible about that. And so by the end of that year, I was just kind of exhausted even thinking about it, and I'd kind of just given up deciding on anything. Essentially, I just sort of was like, I'll just stop thinking about it for a while and come back to it later.
The benefit of being at BYU at the time and
is I kind of had the opportunity to set that aside, because there wasn't much I could do about much of anything anyway without having to switch colleges. So
that bought you some time.
A little bit. So I had kind of just set it aside. Like it was still there in the back of my mind, but I wasn't actively trying to figure out what my path forward was going to look like. I think it was just a back to school blessing from my dad. And I wasn't expecting much. I was expecting a great back to school blessing, but I wasn't expecting any answers or anything.
And he didn't know.
And my dad, I hadn't come out. My dad didn't know anything about what I had been worrying about. They did know that my plan after graduation was that I was going to renovate kind of a camper van and get a big dog and travel the country. And they didn't like that plan very much, but that was my plan. And so when my dad gave me the blessing, he said that I would live a life uncommon, is the phrasing he used. And he paused for a long time before he said it, because he didn't know what he meant by that, and he didn't really like the phrasing, but he just felt very impressed that was what he needed to tell me, was that I would live a life uncommon. And it just hit me with such force, this idea that I hadn't thought of before, that I could marry someone I loved and was attracted to, and still stay in the church as much as possible, participate as much as I was able. And that had never occurred to me before. That wasn't an option I'd seen modeled or talked about. And it just felt right. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt like what I was supposed to do. And so as he kind of wrapped the blessing up, I was just sobbing. I could barely, I couldn't even talk. And he was confused, because he really thought that maybe that meant the whole, van trip. And so he was like, if that's what you want to do, we won't stop you. And so he was confused about my reaction, and I still wasn't ready to come out. So I didn't tell him anything. But that was the first time that I thought that could be an option. And so the more I thought about it, there's still a lot of unknowns. Like I didn't know if I'd be able to find anyone who would be willing to do that with me, or if I would still be doing it kind of on my own, but, still be married to someone who would at least be supportive of me attending. Right. And I didn't know how people in the church would react to that. If I would be able to retain my membership in the church. So there were still a lot of questions, but it just felt right. For the first time in like a year, I didn't feel sick to my stomach. It felt very peaceful and calm. And so yeah, that was kind of how I came to that concept. So a couple months after that, after I'd let that simmer and after I'd found a few more answers and a little more peace in things, then I came out to my family, and they were all really amazing. Even people I had worried about coming out to really surprised me with how accepting they were and how kind. So that was also really helpful, was just having people know and being able to be open. But yeah, and so then that's kind of where I was planning to go after I graduated, because again, I was so close to graduation at BYU. I wasn't about to do anything that would jeopardize that.
Yeah. And then rewinding again, kind of back to things in Arizona. I finished out my missionary service. And at the end of that, I came out to my mission president. And at this point, I was really terrified to go home, because I knew that I'd been biding time before having to figure out what my sexuality meant. And I knew I would have to start facing that. And I was really scared about what that would mean, either for my activity in the church or for my happiness in a partnership. And when I came out to my mission president before going home, he encouraged me to hang on, because we never know what could change. And I asked him later, like, what he meant by that. And he said he didn't know, just that he felt inspired to say it at the moment. And that was something that really stuck with me in the following years. I was figuring out my path. But yeah, so I went home in April of 2019, and was not planning on coming out to my family at that time, or really to many people at all. But I did start coming out to a couple of close friends and others that had made it clear that they were allies to the community, whereas I guess my family had never really thought about or talked about that, so I didn't entirely know where they would stand. So it was scarier, the idea of coming out to them, so I didn't at that time. And later that summer, at the camp that I now work at year round, I roped a couple of missionaries for my mission that had just also gotten home into coming with me and working there. But one of them ended up early on in that summer professing his love to me. And I ended up coming out to him, and that kind of propelled me into coming out to a lot of people, including my mom, which ended up being a pretty positive experience. But I do remember, although I had not really planned on coming out to people, doing that definitely lifted a weight off of my shoulders, because it wasn't so much a secret anymore, and I wasn't holding as much in. So even though I didn't really have answers or know what option I would be pursuing, I felt really relieved. Yeah. So in this interim between getting home from my mission and us going back to BYU, we had a lot of discussions about what our boundaries would look like, because we were committed to still being best friends, but we we wanted to make sure that we did not, I guess, pursue something we weren't ready for.
Yeah. And so we set a lot of kind of clear boundaries, had a lot of talks about what each of us wanted to do in the future. And both of us, I think, worked really hard to, be really respectful and supportive of each other's choices, even if they didn't necessarily match what we were choosing or frankly, what we wanted the other person to choose. And so that was an interesting time because we both were still very much in love with each other, but that wasn't the kind of, that wasn't the kind of relationship that we were willing to have at that time.
Yeah.
So, and then so we stayed just like close friends for the next year and a half, I think, after you got home from your mission.
Year.
Yeah, about a year. And then at the end of that year, I was about to graduate, and Liz was pretty close to graduating too. She was about to start her student teaching, and then the COVID pandemic hit. And so at that, well, I'll let you tell that part.
So throughout that whole school year, I was doing kind of this whole searching that Ryan had did the year or two prior. And I would oscillate between thinking I would pursue that first option of being single and celibate, and then between pursuing a mixed orientation relationship. And so I would be on mutual and try to go on lots of dates, and my heart wasn't in it. And every option I was considering, just like how Ryan had said, just made me feel sick to my stomach. And I just felt so unsettled and really depressed and really hopeless about what my life would look like. It just felt like a long time. And I know that, like, we often hear in the church of, oh, well, things will work out in the eternities. But honestly, that just made me feel like I should just rush things up until eternities. And that wasn't a good space to be in. And so I was really, really actively seeking answers from God, being like, I feel no hope. I feel no goodness with my plan. And just before the pandemic hit, I spent a week in DC. I was supposed to present at a conference, but then 5 hours after I got off the plane, I got a call saying that it had been canceled because of this new pandemic that was hitting the States. And so I ended up stranded in DC for a week, which was honestly so perfect because it gave me a week to just really pour out my heart to God and consider things and be removed from the situation in Provo. And by the end of that week, I'd received an answer that I was supposed to pursue a relationship with Ryan, that was good and that God approved and that he wanted us to be together despite the unconventionality of it. And that I should also strive to stay as close to the Savior as I could. And finally, for the first time in that year, but also in the time on my mission, I really felt peace and I felt hope for what my future would look like.
Yeah. And so she got home from that conference, and pretty soon after she got home, she said, "Hey, I did a lot of thinking, and I think we should date." And I said, "That sounds amazing." And then she also said, "And I will you marry me?"
Wow.
And I said, "That sounds great."
Also knowing that
though.
Yeah. Well, and I also still had another year before I graduated. So I kind of knew we had some time to actually formally date. So I figured.
Yeah. So in some ways our timeline was very mixed up because, we fell in love and then avoided each other kind of for a bit, and then
became best friends.
And then got engaged and then dated. But I wouldn't have it any other way. It all worked out. So, so then we dated for a year, but during the pandemic, so it was definitely a very low key time. And then in 2021, we got married at the summer camp that she'd been working at for quite a long time at that point, that she works at now, and that was beautiful. And our families were really supportive and really loving, and
for the most part,
there were a few members of our family that had harder times, or who still have a hard time sometimes with our relationship, and that's okay. And I think, one, so many people have been so supportive, it really softens the blow of the people who aren't. So we're so grateful for that. And one of the other things that I try really hard to keep in mind is to give people time and give people grace, because, I had quite a few years of unlearning and relearning and time to come to terms with what being gay meant for me, or what it might mean for my loved ones, that I would be pursuing an unconventional path. And I had all this time to come to terms with all of that. But for my family, they kind of had to start that process when I came out to them. And so to expect them to be where I was at right away is unreasonable, and I found that the more time I give people, often how to put this, they tend to surprise me with where they come to, and the way that they react when they're given the time to process, that I had taken for myself. So, so that's actually, been really good. And a lot of, even some of our family members who took it a little harder at first have really become some of our most amazing allies and most amazing supporters. So I'm a big proponent for, giving people the time that we needed ourselves, essentially, to get used to things. But that was our wedding was amazing. And now we've been married for about 2.5 years. Right after we got married, we moved to Houston for some job opportunities and some school stuff, and really loved it there. Our ward there was really supportive and really friendly, and we just felt so much love from so many people in our ward there. Had a really good relationship with our bishop and our stake president and other members of the presidencies, and that was really nice. Made some really good friends, and
it was interesting there. And we'll compare this to our experience in our new ward here in Yakima a bit, but in that ward, people really welcomed us with loving arms. But the fact that we were married to each other, or the fact that we were gay, was very much an unspoken elephant in the room. But that elephant didn't hinder their love for us, their kindness. But it was interesting because it did feel in some ways like we were leaving that part of ourselves at the door. Like we were kind of seen as what's the word?
Yeah, they loved having us there and us being there, but I feel like the fact that we were married was unacknowledged, which is okay in some ways. In some ways that was I don't know.
I think that was easier. Yeah, especially with that being our first ward that we were in together. We just, I don't know if we were ready to have all those conversations about that yet. And so, it was, I think, in some ways what we needed at that point. But in our ward here, I feel like people see us more as our whole, holistic selves, and will are not afraid of mentioning like the word gay or mentioning the word wife. And
which has its positives and its challenges. Because for some people, they're very intentional in like advocating for us and in acknowledging our identities. But for other people, they're also a little more outspoken in their unsurety, essentially, about why we're there or
what our intentions or
what our agenda is and that sort of thing. And so it can be a little more challenging because the support is more outspoken, but so is some of the fear, I think, of some members. And so it's different. I would say they've both been actually net positive experiences, but it has been a little different in each ward that we've attended.
Yeah, we feel a little bit more seen as our whole selves in this one, but in some ways also felt a little bit more comfortable in our last ward in some way. I mean, it's just in different ways, but yeah. So not saying either one is the right way to go per se, but
yeah, I don't know that one of them really is necessarily better than the other, just different.
Yeah.
But we've really found that as we've been attending church, the individual members in particular have just made, I felt connected to my wards in ways that I never felt before attending as a gay couple. And I think a lot of that is because I've found that the individual members are so quick to come meet us where we're at and to come say, hey, we want you here. We're glad that you're here. We want your voices. And that's been just really incredible to know that we're, I'm so sorry, I'm having a hard time vocalizing this thought, but I guess it's such a Christ-like way to approach someone, to say that, you enrich our community by being here. We need your voice to be the whole body of Christ. And we want to know what your experience is like, because it makes our experience that much more well-rounded. And being on the receiving end of that kind of like Christ-like inclusion has been, I think, one of the most spiritual things that I've ever experienced.
Mm-hmm. And it's also been really cool getting to be able to be a part of people's faith journeys in helping them stay. Like we've had several friends or like family members of ward members who have told us, like, seeing you here, despite everything that comes with, has made it feel like I can stay, and like that I can be here to show up for the one and to focus on my relationship with Christ, even though I have struggles with X, Y, and Z in the church. And both in Houston and in Utah, where Ryan's home ward is, and here now, we just kept getting reached out to by board members and stake members and people we'd never even met, being like, hey, can you talk with my friend, or my daughter wants to talk to you, or my friend.
Yeah, basically just saying, I know someone who is looking for more options, who isn't sure what they want to do, because they really, they cherish their faith, but they also, are gay or whatever intersection of faith and sexuality, they're experiencing. And so we would talk with them, and pretty much we just kept meeting these people who are just like, I just feel so limited in my choices, and I don't know where to go from here. And so that's kind of why we decided to create this Instagram account about a month and a half ago now, just to try and see if we could connect some of those people who are looking for more options than just the three that we're presented as having, as LGBTQ LDS people. And it's been really amazing getting to connect with all of these people in just a myriad of circumstances who love their faith and who love Jesus and who love this community, this LDS community that maybe they've grown up in or have joined later. And I don't know, and who want to have both, who don't want to choose between the two, but just want to still be able to hold both parts of their identities equally as true,
Yeah. So it's been really incredible, and we're grateful for all the people we've gotten to connect with and who've strengthened our faith and our relationship. And I don't know, we feel very seen and very heard and very loved. And we hope that we're able to create a space for other people to also feel seen and loved, and like they have all of the options in the world open to them, not just the traditional three.
Thank you, Ryan and Liz. It's really an honor to have you on the podcast and share your story and just listen to it for the first time, like our listeners are listening to the first time. I wish our listeners could see you on the screen like I can, because the interaction between you is so wonderful, and the grace and knowing when it's somebody else's turn to talk, and you balance each other so well. You know each other so well, and you're so complementary and compatible with each other. And now you're giving each other a little hug, which is just great. This is just a really wonderful podcast, listeners. And I've done so many of these that every time I listen to somebody, I hear a sort of a different story within the LGBTQ space. It just reminds me of my younger self that knew a couple gay people and thought, well, I've kind of checked that group of people off and I can move on. But there's so many different stories and experiences within this space that we're all grateful you're listening to this podcast and getting to know more queer people, because I just think that helps us do better. Here's some of the things. First of all, just thank you for the missions you served and the people's lives you blessed, the courage to serve missions. It's not required of you two, as female Latter-day Saints, the education you've gotten, both of you, your education is focused on helping other people. Outside of this whole story of your sexual orientation being married, and that's a good story too, but there's this personal story of just who you two are and the good that you've done in our society, in our church, in our community, and the good you continue to do. You two are just terrific women. So thank you just on behalf of a fellow Latter-day Saint for your courage to serve and all the good you're doing in so many circles. And I still want to go to that island off of the side of Australia. I can't remember if it's the west or the east.
It's gorgeous there.
I've seen some pics. One of the things that I think of rhetorically, and maybe we won't spend time on this too much, is just culturally, men are conditioned it's okay to have sexual feelings. And sometimes culturally, the men are out of control, and culturally, the women are not out of control. In fact, we're trying to, get you to dress more modestly because the boys are out of control. And I wonder if culturally we haven't allowed women to have sexual feelings or open up about or be willing to understand their sexual orientation as easy as it is for men. Most of the stories I hear from women are they come to this a little bit later than men. I don't know if that's true. Listeners, it's just sort of an impression or a trend line I've seen in my personal experience. And I think it's a reason I bring that up. I think it's a really good thing that people figure out their sexual orientation before they make major life decisions. And I think that's one of the great accomplishments and messages of your story is you figured out your sexual orientation, being gay, before you made major life decisions, and you took that to God, as part of your receiving personal revelation in the equation. So and I think better information leads to better revelation. I just think, so that's one of the things I've really come to believe is that, people need to figure out their sexual orientation if they're not 100% heterosexual before they make major life decisions, come out to God, come out to themselves, and really figure out their best path forward from a position of strength, which you two, I think, have really done a great job of that. It's not been easy, but I think it's been really very thoughtful. And there's culturally, it's easier for two women to be together. We wouldn't think of you as a couple, as a gay couple, if you're hanging out together, if you even have your arms around each other. Why two men your age at BYU probably, and so I don't know what that means. It's just a different culture a little bit. And so some might say, well, you just were allowed to sort of be together. And so you really aren't gay. You just emotionally connected. And I think that the listeners are pretty clear that that's not true. That's my younger self that might have tried to manufacture a backstory. These are two straight women that just spent so much time together that they emotionally connected. And you said something, Ryan, really powerful. I wrote this down if I got it word for word. You don't fall in love with a girl unless you're wired to like girls. And I think that was really, that's my feeling, is that this is your sexual orientation. You're wired for this, to the same sex. And as some of my listeners have talked about, it's more than sexual orientation. It's emotional, it's intellectual, it's everything I'm wired about. I'm wired to the same sex, including sexual orientation. So just
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
Yeah. In my patriarchal blessing, it says that within my marriage, I would experience all that is physical, emotional, and spiritual. And that line actually was a big part of my coming to terms with my sexuality and choosing to marry Ryan, because I knew really deep inside me that was not possible with a man. And I tried really hard to make that possible, but that's just not how I was wired. And with Ryan, it was just so easy and natural. So.
And I do, there are some marriages where someone goes into a marriage and, they aren't really sure of their sexual orientation, or they may have. And so there's stories of marriages that haven't worked because of someone sort of becoming aware of their sexual orientation down the road. So I also recognize that some mixed orientation marriages really work, listeners. We've had those on the podcast, and I think those do best when the person who's not straight comes out to the person who's straight, and they both get personal revelation for that. But those marriages can work. And so this is a platform that's sort of saying, get personal revelation, be open about who you are, get that internalized homophobia out of you so you can really be honest with who you are, get personal revelation, be honest with family and people you're dating. And I just think then there's better outcomes. Some of those outcomes aren't within church teachings. I don't want to harp on that too much. We all know that, but you're not outside of God's love and our love and being welcome in the church. And so I look at this and I look at the background of your relationship as a really healthy relationship. I'm not a marriage counselor, but I recognize that marriages where there's this long foundation of friendship and trust and communication and wrestling through hard things, and the sort of the tools that are built as part of the foundation of your marriage make for a better marriage, because you've already developed some of the tools that sometimes culturally people get married pretty quick and then they develop those after the marriage, and they can still be great marriages. But I just sense you went into this marriage with a lot of foundation. And it probably wasn't a big jarring change of life just to go from unmarried to married.
Yeah. Getting married to Ryan was the easiest thing ever. And adapting to married life with her was so easy and so
part
good.
of this whole journey. Yeah.
Younger self listeners, when I would have heard somebody receive personal revelation outside of church teachings, I would have said, this is Satan deceiving you, or this is you just wanting to do what you want to do from a selfish standpoint. I'm sorry to say that out loud. My older self would just say, I just trust you to receive revelation that you're receiving, and it's not my job to judge your personal revelation. And there's a book that's written called Both Things Can Be True. So the way I navigate that is I support our church leaders, our church teachings, our church doctrine. We have the proclamation of the family hang in our home, and I support you too. And the personal revelation that you got, the lives you're living, and my love for you. I don't know you except this podcast. I just, I sense you're staying close to God and I just leave any judgment. I used to have this false dichotomy, listeners, that to fully love and follow God, I need to stop loving some of his children, like LGBTQ people. And now I just feel like unless they're causing harm to me or others, that I can just leave that all, I can just leave that and say, my job is to love. It's not, love the sinner, hate the sin. It's just love. And there's no condition to that unless there's needed boundaries because of a trauma or painful or abusive situation. I think of some would say, well, should I go to a same-sex wedding? And I wrestled with that for a while. And, then somebody told me about would we as Latter-day Saints, if we were invited to attend an infant baptism for our Catholic friends, and most Latter-day Saints would go. They'd support their friends in their finest moment. And our doctrine's pretty clear about how we feel about infant baptism. So maybe it's like we just try to support people in their finest moments. And one of your finest or most important moments was your marriage. And there's a picture of that on your Instagram page. And I, smiled when I saw you both together. And so it's your finest moment. It's a decision you made. And so, I'm glad that you had so much family there. And I don't think we're selling out God to be there. I think we're just loving his children and supporting them and leaving judgment at the feet of our Savior. Now, church discipline, listeners, I don't want to make this too much of my story. And this is maybe for leaders wondering, or anybody just wondering, what would I do if I were the bishop and had a same-sex couple coming to church? And the handbook doesn't require me to do anything. There's things that require church discipline, and this isn't one of them. And so there's no requirement to do church discipline. And a principle that my brother taught me as I started my YSA assignment was to sort of counsel. He always felt like church discipline was not meant to bring somebody down, but it was meant to help somebody that wanted to fully return to the church, fully have a temple recommend in a positive way. And so some of the YSAs that were sexually active and not worthy of temple recommend, I would just counsel with them and say, would church discipline help you? It wasn't required, but it was optional. And we'd counsel together and decide if that was actually helpful versus me just saying, this is what we're going to do or not going to do. And it helped me to get better personal revelation. And some of those YSAs I think the principle is they wanted to return to full activity. They wanted to have a temple recommend. They wanted to go through the church disciplinary process as part of that. And some didn't. They didn't really want at that point to return to full church activity. So I think it can drive people away just to do church discipline because we're standing up for the truth of the church, or we're trying to, in a loving way, we think this will help you come back to the church. My experience generally is it drives people away. So I hope that's okay. I'm not really talking to you two. I'm just talking to people that might have priesthood responsibility, or just people that I just think we do what I think Jesus modeled his ministry is just help everybody feel welcome and belonging. And you don't have an agenda. You're not out to turn all the straight kids gay, but that usually doesn't work. We know conversion therapy to make queer people straight hasn't worked. So I don't think just you showing up in church is going to make straight people not straight, but it may help closeted LGBTQ people feel there's a place for me, or there's some representation for me, and they maybe have some suicidal ideation that this helps to see stable, responsible, high functioning adults. And I like what you pointed out. I think it was Liz, that there's people in every congregation that are in faith crisis, figuring if they're going to stay or leave in the church, and never thought of it. They're sort of, I think some have reached out to you, like you said. I hope people caught that and said, well, if you're willing to stay, maybe I can stay too. Because this is obviously complex, being gay in a same-sex marriage. So those are some of the thoughts I have, listeners. I think we need to be serious about this word belonging that our leaders are using. And you have so many people that are helping you feel belong. So even though I'm inviting us not to do church discipline, I want to thank all the people in your circles, in your 2 wards, that are helping you feel like you belong and are needed. I don't think you're activists. I don't think you're saying, have a sign that says change church doctrine, or wanting to do a pride parade in the middle of the 3rd hour. We don't have 3rd hour at the, you're smiling.
Maybe that's why they got rid of the 3rd hour.
So I don't think you're saying, give me temple recommends. We want to have a temple same-sex marriage. You're recognizing these are the rules of the church. And hopefully you can even serve in ways that don't require a temple recommend. So I've spoken for about 10 minutes, and I just want to see if there's anything I've said that's unsettling to you, or anything you want to build on, or just any direction you want to go.
No, none of that was unsettling. I think the only thing that came to mind for me is that is something that we do want to honor when we do share our story, is that, the first 3 paths that we talked about, they didn't work for us. They weren't the right path for us, but we know a lot of people that they do work for, and, people in each path that have chosen it, and that's where they feel that they need to be. And we do always want to honor that,
their agency and their revelation and
absolutely
their choices.
Yeah. Like this whole 4th option is what we kind of call it, of getting married or dating someone of the same gender and staying in the church. It isn't necessarily for everybody. And so, yeah, just honoring that personal revelation of everybody is the most qualified person to know what their walk with God should look like.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and we will be honest, like, this path is not easy. Like it comes with a lot of pain and wrestling and unsurety on the church membership side. We never know if we're going to go to church and that day get a letter saying that a membership council has been scheduled, or we never know what someone might say from the pulpit that might be triggering. But it also comes with so much joy and peace. And I don't know, we just really treasure the opportunity to get to fellowship with saints and getting to continue our relationship with God and feeling the Spirit in our home and getting to serve in the ways we're able. So it's not an easy path, but it's one that we've found a lot of beauty in. And, we might change course in the future. We never know. We're not saying that we will 100% stay on the trajectory we're on now, but it's where we feel called to be at this time. And so we're here.
There's a lot of grace in your story. I love that, that you recognize this is not, you're not an ally like me, doesn't have a backstory. So I can just sort of provide this platform to share lots of stories. And I love that you've got a story because you're in this space. And it's a valid story. It's an authentic story, but you're not saying everybody's got it. The grace you give that it's not going to be everybody's story is very mature. And I think I'm seeing more of that, and more of my guests are saying, this is just my story. Don't make it, I just love this idea, which is what our church teaches: write your own story with Christ, hear him. That's a core doctrinal foundational point of the church, is personal revelation. And for everybody. But you've both spent a lot of time in thought and prayer. And, Liz, you went on that mission. You both went on missions, but I'm just aware that Liz is wrestling with her sexual orientation. At least you talked about it more during your mission. You're wondering about Ryan. You're wondering, and you just bravely go serve. And during that time, I think you came more aware, more self-aware of your sexual orientation. And so one of the things I often invite younger Latter-day Saints that are queer that may not be sure about their future is I would still really consider a mission. I'd be prayerful about it, and I'd ask for personal revelation. You may bless a lot of people, which will bring you great satisfaction to help people come into Christ through our church. But it may be a wonderful time for you to just grow and mature. And I write about 3 or 4, I'm on their email distribution, openly gay missionaries that you look at their Facebook profile and it says gay Latter-day Saint right there in their mission profile. So I'm not saying you two should have done that, but I just think more are becoming aware of their sexual orientation earlier, owning it earlier. And I think that leads to just better choices and better personal revelation and making decisions not out of fear, out of a reaction, or out of pain, or out of vulnerability, which you've all felt, but just out of, I'm my best personal self right now. So I'm going to make an intentional decision that feels right for me, and I'm going to own that. It's not a reaction to anything. And at the end of the day, it's just going to be, in the case you two and Jesus judging you, we're all going to be gone. We're not going to be part of that conversation sometime in the next life. It's you two and Jesus, or however that works. But so I also wrote down, sometimes this is back to, I'm not trying to counsel bishops here. I'm just a rank and file member. But a couple times I met with, as a YSA bishop, people that were not active. And I would often ask them, just, what can I do to support you? I kind of want them to be active in the church and get a temple recommend, but there were a few that didn't want that. So I would just say, what can I do to support you? And they often had things that I could do to help them. And I just decided to make that not conditional on them returning to church or get a temple recommend. I just felt, because I looked at Christ's ministry, that's what Christ do. I was just going to love them, and within the things that I could do as a local leader, what I could do to help them. And a few did come back to church, but that wasn't an agenda. It wasn't like a transactional relationship. I just love these YSAs because they deserve to be loved. One story is just one young man active in the church felt his path wasn't to serve a mission. And at first I felt, well, my job was to get him on a mission. And then I just listened to him for a long time. And I sensed he was pretty beat up, and he was about ready to leave the church because he was just getting defined by somebody that wasn't going on a mission. I just said, his name's in my second book. When I wrote about him with his permission, I said, Adrian, you just need to feel welcome here. Do you want to go to the temple? And he wanted to go to the temple. And so it's just a story of a principle of, I'll walk with you, and what can I do to support you? And you sort of write the agenda, and I'll kind of walk with you and help you. So maybe some of that applies to, anybody that's working in their ward with the same-sex couple. What can I do to support you? Go ahead, Liz.
And just speaking to any church leaders here, a lot of queer members have a lot of trauma surrounding church leadership and bishops and things, either outdated beliefs that they had held on to that came into light during conversations with them, or fears that we've built up in our head. And so the gentler and the kinder and the more open to listening you can be, the safer and the more welcome queer members will feel at church. And we've connected with a lot of people who had essentially pursued the third option and then are recently attempting to return to activity. And you often are their first point of contact when they return into one of our chapels. And yeah, just there's a lot of anxiety there. And so the way that you receive us can have a huge impact. And so you have a lot of power to help us feel loved and safe in a church space when we maybe historically haven't felt that way.
Then I think, Liz, what can you do to sort of, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of brainstorming here. If I were a homeward bishop and had a same-sex couple attending, I might just proactively meet with them and said, let's read the handbook together. And the handbook doesn't require me to do disciplinary counsel, so I have no plans to do that. And I have the priesthood keys for this ward. And unless you want to do a disciplinary council because you want to return to full membership, which would probably require you splitting up, let's just take that off the table so you don't wonder one day if that's going to come. So the drip.
I know for us, that would be huge. Just so knowing there's not plans or tentative plans in the works there.
And maybe the stake president needs to be involved in that. And so they're both priesthood leaders are on the same page, but it just takes the anxiety, because there is probably a lot of anxiety. And there's I've read a lot of social media posts of people trying to be, come to church, and then they do go through a disciplinary council, and it's really difficult for them. And then I think, another thing we can do is create a culture that if you're trying to come back and you're just wanting a safe place that, as a young men's leader, a young woman's leader, I'm just constantly saying kind things about people in different political parties, people that have working through addictions, people that have left the church, people have questions. So I'm just people of different races, people that are illegal. And so you just, without saying it directly, you just eventually it creates a culture around you that I can probably open up to this person about the realities of my life, because all I hear this person talking about is just kind things about everybody we don't usually talk about. And that's what Christ did, I think, in his ministry. So I love that sort of, Liz, what can we do to take, because there's trauma there, and what can we do to make it a safer culture for awards? One of the things I did is that I want to make it feel like I'm the success story of a YSA bishop, because I could probably find some people who come on the podcast and say I was a terrible YSA bishop. Anyway, one of the things I did towards the end of being a YSA bishop is I started to post kind things about queer people on social media, and just using church quotes. It wasn't like, there's church quotes. And it was interesting. What happened is actually no more YSAs came out to me, but a bunch of the straight YSAs, including some that were completely inactive, just said, okay, I can talk to this guy. I am not queer, but I have things going in my life, and I know he is a safe person for me. So there's a principle there about creating a culture in your family, your ward, or whatever your circle of influence is in the church, so that people feel safe opening up to you. Mm-hmm. And the trauma or the wondering of what next sort of angsty thing you're going to hear can be toned down. More thoughts on any of that? You're getting me talking more, and I want to make sure this isn't my story. This is your story.
No, I love what you're saying. I think that whole concept that you mentioned, I was thinking about how wonderful it is to be the concept of being spoken to instead of about. So inviting, if there are members of your ward that you're concerned about, inviting them into the conversation, and saying, hey, like, and people can be honest. We know that we can be a bit of a puzzle for ward leaders, when they're first sort of confronted with the concept. And when we're invited into that conversation with them, I don't know, it feels a lot better. It feels a lot more understanding, I guess. I don't know, just more like it's like we're working together to find a solution instead of being worked against. And it does ease a lot of that anxiety to be a part of that conversation.
I love that, Ryan. And I love the symbolism of even we shouldn't even be sitting on opposite sides of the desk. And so I'm thinking of the physical it's like we're sitting in the same room working on the same problem, versus we're on two different sides of the room or two different sides of the desks. And I think of Gathering of Israel being, all the people you tried to find in your respective missions to bring unto Christ, and you two are Israel, and you need to feel gathered when you're at church. You need to feel welcome, loved, belonging, and gathered as part of the body of Christ, because you are your Heavenly Father's children, and that hasn't changed. And you're good women. And so you're brave, and I love your Instagram account, and we'll put the Instagram account in the show notes. And anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Just for those that are queer who are listening, just know that there's a lot of hope ahead, whatever that looks like for you. And for loved ones and friends of queer folks that are listening, if you're listening to this and your loved one has chosen a path that's different than ours, I invite you to resist the urge to send this to them for the purpose of trying to get them to choose a different way. We have received a lot of messages from very well-intended parents saying, "Oh, my queer child has left the church, but now I hope that they'll do what you're doing." And maybe if that's what they want, or if that's something they're seeking, then that's great. But I just encourage you to honor the agency and the personal revelation of your loved ones. And just because this is our path, it doesn't mean it's supposed to be theirs.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan and Liz Giles, for joining us. Check out the show notes for their Instagram account and act on the impressions you felt. And if you're an ally or parent, a local leader, and if you're queer, hopefully this is a podcast that helps you as you're navigating your path forward. And hopefully you have a little more hope and a little more peace, and God loves you. And this is Richard Ostler signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.